in Jacksonville? I don't think so, but it's a unique situation, and I'll tell you about it on this edition of Locked On Jaguars.
You are Locked On Jags, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for joining us here on Locked On Jaguars today, where today's episode is brought to you by Blue Nile. Make your moment sparkle with jewelry from BlueNile.com. And Locked On Jaguars listeners get $50 off purchases of $500 more. This podcast exclusive includes engagement. That's right. You get to talk to them one-on-one. Use the promo code Locked On at checkout. What is going on, folks? Thank you for making us your first listen here on Locked On Jaguars. We are always, as always, very, very grateful to have you here because we're free on all platforms, and it's your team every day. It's your team. You need to get here. Now, of course, I preface that by saying during the month of June, it's been 3 days a week, but we're just gearing up for training camp, getting all of this stuff ready to go. So when we start back to our regular daily schedule, you'll know where we are. And we are, again, free on all platforms. Make sure you like and subscribe on the YouTube page as well. I want to talk about a certain wide receiver that's been, I've seen a lot of articles on him lately. His name is Laviska Shenault. He's a third-year player out of Colorado State. Laviska had a pretty good rookie year and was considered a guy that at some point, look, I heard all the comparisons. I heard Andre Johnson. I heard Anquan Bolden. I heard a mix of the two. I even at one point said the dude was built like RoboCop when I saw him at practice. All of those things. Now you're hearing, can they use him like Deebo Samuel? You're hearing all of these things and all of this stuff. And I don't agree with any of those, but I will say that Laviska has a very unique situation here in Jacksonville, and I'll discuss it. I thought he was going to get traded. I thought he was going to get traded because of people that I met at some of the off-season events, people that would know whether or not he was happy here or not. And I'll just say I thought he was going to get traded. In fact, I almost knew he was going to get traded too, if you believe certain things. But there was something that happened, and here's what I think happened with the Jaguars. I think they hired Doug Peterson. Doug Peterson says, now, wait a minute. Let me look at tape. Let me look at film. Probably not just 2021, but 2020 as well. He said, look, we got this guy in the contract. Why are we getting rid of a guy who had about 20 catches or more for 15 yards or more the year before, who along with James Robinson was one of the only bright spots on offense in the 2020 season. And then last year, all hell sort of breaks loose in the entire organization, and he doesn't play as well. Some people may want to point to the drops at inopportune times, which they did happen, okay? There were drops. There were moments in games where you're like, come on, Viska, we need that one. Sometimes some of those things come along with pressing. Sometimes they come along with wanting to do more than you have to do, wanting it so bad that you just can't get it. A lack of rhythm and repetition with a quarterback who in training camp split reps with somebody, you heard me, split reps with a dude that's a backup quarterback in the NFL right now, after you took Trevor number 1 overall. Being coached by Sanjay Lal, who for some reason is loved in Seattle, and I'll give them credit for it. He did have Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf being statistical leaders and a great duo in the NFL before he came to Jacksonville. But he's different from Keenan McCardell, who Laviska had the first year. So some of these things are just reasons, not excuses. But then you had your own eyeballs on what you saw, and you were like, I don't know. One of the biggest needs that all the fans got on me about, so much that even when I used to just even make a mere suggestion that they pick somebody else or sign somebody else in free agency that didn't play wide receiver, all of a sudden here it comes. They need a wide receiver first. There were mock drafts that joked, free agency and mock drafts that joked. Who do you think the Jaguars need to sign? People listed 3 wide receivers, and then they do mock drafts and post them. It had 5 wide receivers drafted in every round. 1 in the first, 2 in the second, 2 in the third, and 1 in the fourth and fifth. I mean, it was ridiculous. With all of that being said, that means that most people, regardless if you're one of those people right now who's saying there's no way you trade him, and I get that, most people thought the number one need on the team was wide receivers, and they thought that it was multiple receivers. So I'm not here on an island by myself when I'm saying that I thought they should have really, and they did to a certain extent, address the wide receiver position and do it heavily. One of those reasons is you have a franchise quarterback, which you've never had in this organization, with all due respect to Mark Bonnell. Everyone knows you've never had what you have with Trevor Lawrence here. A lot of teams haven't, and that's okay because guys like Trevor Lawrence don't really come along very often. At least what we think he is, that it doesn't come along very often. We just don't want all of that wasted with hope and wish and maybe, especially when you have a bunch of salary cap. If you're the Jaguars, no, you need to go out and get as many weapons as you can. Now we've arrived to what I'm going to talk about today. There are a lot of folks that, looking back, probably remember the Jaguars a few years back thinking they've arrived at quarterback and not getting competition, at wide receiver and using backups, actually looking like they used to go out and get guys who were career backups to be a career backup, as opposed to getting guys who look like they could be starters and as backups and just press the hell and create competition for the guys that were in front of them. This is one of the big problems I had with that regime. That regime seemed like they honed in on their guys, and then with the exception of pass rushers, but once they honed in on their guys, they seem to almost want to fit guys into being role players behind those stars instead of just creating competition and saying, you know what? No, everybody's a starter. I'm going to throw a stake in the middle of the room, and whoever gets to it and whoever's the alpha, that's the guy we're throwing the ball to. So we're kind of headed in that direction now. That's the way it is now. But I do think that there are a few people, when they think about Laviska Shenault, and, well, you shouldn't trade him, and when they give the reason for him not being traded, they think that the justification is going to come in the form of certain statistics, and that's where they might be wrong. I'm going to tell you exactly what I mean, just in case you're confused, because I understand being confused when I talk, because, quite frankly, it's easy for me to confuse people. But I'm going to get to the crux of it and really help you guys out when it comes to figuring out exactly what I'm talking about in terms of Laviska Shenault and how I think it's going to affect the Jaguars and your perception of them retaining him. After I tell you guys about RockAuto.com, this episode is also brought to you by RockAuto.com. And I'm happy because my daughter is in Charlotte and she goes back to work every day. And she has to drive about 40 minutes down to South Carolina. And you know what? She has RockAuto.com parts on her vehicle. And I'm very happy with it. One, because she saved time and money. But two, just the quality of the parts are off the chain. And they have every single thing that you could ever want. And they understand what it means for you to feel good about the safety of your family, because it is a family-owned business that have been serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. They have everything you could ask for or need: brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, even new carpet. Why pay 30 to 40 or 50%, sometimes even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or car dealership when you can do what I'm about to tell you to do? That is, go to your laptop or your mobile device and sign in to rockauto.com. Just Google it, pull it up, and they're going to ask you, how did you hear about us? I want you to enter Locked On in that how did you hear about us box so that they know we sent you. They have an amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need, and it's at rockauto.com. Glad to have you guys here on a Wednesday, making us your first listen here on Locked On Jaguars in June, trying to get through this month of June, man. This month of June has absolutely been flying And I know you guys are happy about that because we got to get back to the action. There isn't any sports. There is, however, the NBA draft. One live NBA draft show is not enough for Locked On. The entire NBA channel is going live on NBA draft night. So if you have a favorite team, make sure you subscribe now to their Locked On YouTube channel so you get notified when they go live on NBA draft night. Remember, you have to go to the individual team page. It's not the same as the Locked On NFL draft show, but the coverage is just as good because our experts, our local experts with the NBA clubs, are going to be breaking it down. I know people around here will be interested because the Orlando Magic have the number one pick, and hopefully they can get it right because they can't get right now in the NBA. Speaking of which, the can't get right of the NFL is the team that we cover here on Locked On Jaguars, but we hope they have turned it around and have gotten it right. We're talking about Laviska Shenault. So there's this line of thinking that you don't trade a player in his third season who's had one good year and then a bad year when everything went wrong. It was Murphy's Law. You keep him. He can be a little bit of a Swiss Army knife. First of all, he's not Deebo Samuel. I want everybody to stop that foolishness. The people that, well, he's the same size and he's this. Deebo Samuel is a freakazoid and he's rare, okay? Laviska Shenault ain't Deebo Samuel. And Deebo Samuel is a great player who's a very good wide receiver who does things for the team that now, once he does those things, people say, well, that's what he is. He's a gimmick. No, he's not. Whatever you ask him to do, he's going to be able to do it, all right? There's never been any doubt about him except him staying healthy. But Laviska, you saw him healthy on the field last year, and it left a little bit of doubt in a lot of people's mind about whether he was the guy. Now, what do I mean by the guy? As a number one receiver, I don't think he's a number one receiver. I don't think he's ever going to be a number one receiver, but that's okay. There are a lot of number three receivers that are very, very good football players. But those people who said, you shouldn't trade him, I don't mind that they didn't trade him. Let me tell you why I thought it was advantageous. And I'm going to give you another past Jaguar to use as an example, Dante Fowler. Dante Fowler had 2 years left on his deal with the fifth-year option because he was a first-round pick. He was coming off a season where he had 9.5 sacks in the regular season and another 2 sacks in the playoffs. I said, with those numbers, go ahead and try to move him now. Why? Because you have Yannick Ngakoue and you have Calais Campbell. You have this guy in his third year because normally teams go, if he's available, why is he available, right? But my point is his value would never be as high as it was then. Well, the season started. They played. At some point, they decided they were going to trade him. They got a third-round pick for him. I think that might have been the following year, too. I think that might even been in 2018 or 19. And I'm thinking, like, you can only get a third-round pick for a guy who can actually get after the quarterback for 7.5, 8. I mean, guys like that getting $80, $90 million over 4 or 5 years. Well, I think they waited a year too late. I think, and while his name was still registering on the tongue of people, they allowed some bad play to get in, and they allowed him not starting to get in, and then they allowed the team to be awful. And now you want to go ahead and get rid of Dante Fowler. So now it's a buyer's market. So with Laviska Shenault, you have the 2020 season when he looked very good. And then you have last year, this whole Urban Meyer thing where everyone looked bad. It's like being under a blanket and somebody passes gas, everybody smell, but it doesn't mean that you got gas problems. It just means you was in the wrong place at the wrong time. So that's why I say, okay, if you're going to move him, go ahead and move him now. When the wide receiver class in the draft was top heavy, but as Doug Peterson even said, there wasn't a whole bunch in those middle rounds. It was top heavy, but then after that, it really, really tailed off. When the free agency class never really blossomed to be what it normally is with the wide receivers because it was top heavy, but guys were getting traded and they were getting franchise tagged to the point where Christian Kirk, he's a Jaguar, and you know, there's a lot to be desired, said to be desired about how much he paid. I don't think they overpaid for him because I actually pay attention to contracts and how they're structured. But there's this talk around the league that the Jags ruined free agents because they gave Christian Kirk so much. In a draft where people around the league are talking that way, that means a guy who's proven or a guy who someone may like has some value. So I said the value will never be higher. The Jaguars then go out and, like I said, they signed Christian Kirk and they signed Zay Jones. They've now lauded and talked so much about Marvin Jones Sr. and what he means to this organization to the point where they put him on a mural and they raved about his leadership. So the average football fan or a smart writer, who I know a lot of them and they're friends of mine. I think my man Demetrius is one, and John Shipley, they both were like, why trade him? Why would you do it? And I get keeping the valuable player, keeping a guy who can press to be a starter, keeping a guy, because it goes against the old way of doing business with the Jaguars, where it's like, well, if you're not a starter, we're going to just use you as a backup, or use you as a guy who can, who looks like a backup, as opposed to constantly having this competition. So for that purpose, it was something I mentioned in segment one. I'm glad the Jaguars decided to keep Laviska around and say, okay, he's a starter in this league, but right now coming into camp, he's our number 4. Because whether you guys want to believe it or not, or whether we all want to believe it or not, that's exactly where it is. And now I'll break it down and tell you why. One, because you made Christian Kirk like Captain Kirk, like Superman, when you paid him a guarantee of $37 million over 2 years. Okay, he's the one they're looking for first when they go. You don't pay a guy that kind of money without making him your first look, like you make us your first listen, right? And if you do, that means you're hustling backwards, and what you've done is you've overpaid for Christian Kirk. So they're going to not do that. They're going to go out. Then you go out and you give Zay Jones a 4-year deal for $30 million, and you talk about how much he's going to mean to the game, right? And how much he's going to mean to the team. And they talk about how in the second half of last year, his second half of the season, if you double it, he has like a Pro Bowl season, right? So he's going to get passes, and he's also going to line up with the starters. And then Marvin Jones Sr., who's already here, he's your slot guy, so he's going to line up with the starters. Now, under no circumstances am I naive enough to think that things won't happen or something might not happen or might happen to allow a guy to be able to get on the field. I'm also not saying that you can't spread the ball around. I'm also not saying that being a number 4 receiver on a team doesn't mean you're ever going to get passes thrown to you, because we've seen teams like Tampa that had a Hall of Famer, had another guy who's knocking on the door of a Hall of Fame, and another guy who just got a $100 million contract, and then you still saw Scotty, whatever his name, and then the other kid who's the number 4 receiver get passes thrown to him. You've seen these other teams go to their 3rd and 4th receiver. Those teams have something in common, and I'm going to explain to you what it is. Winning. In segment 3, before we're not even there yet, because I'm not finished with this, but in segment 3, I'm going to tell you why winning or not winning will determine if a set outcome is acceptable or not. I talked about this with the sacks with Travon Walker versus Aiden Hutchinson, that if Aiden Hutchinson has double-digit sacks and Travon Walker doesn't, no one's going to be angry if the Jaguars win and Detroit doesn't. Because being a contributor on a winning team means more than being a guy who gets a bunch of stats on a team that doesn't win. Case in point, Leonard Fournette's career year in the NFL was with the Jacksonville Jaguars. The last season he played, he probably had 16, 17, 1,800 yards combined between rushing and passing. He had a game where he went over 200 yards, and he got cut the next year, seemingly for undrafted rookie. And then the fans were like, bye, see you later. We don't need you no more. You suck. So the thing is, he got more acclaim for being playoff leaning because they won, and he did less statistically. So the thing that I'll tell you about is this. If Christian Kirk is worth the money statistically, and he does those things, and Zay Jones makes the contribution you think he's going to make, and Marvin Jones Sr. does the things that you think he's going to do, and Laviska Shenault makes enough of an impact that you don't question whether, it was a good or a bad job to keep him. If all of those things happen, Trevor Lawrence is going to be an all-pro, and the team's going to the playoffs. So let's just assume that that's what we aspire to happen, but that's not everything that's going to happen. So let's say some of those things don't happen. Let's just say they improve, but they're not that great. All right, if they improve and they're not that great and nobody gets hurt, you're either going to be mad at Christian Kirk as a fan, you're going to be mad at, or you're going to be mad at Trent Baalke for signing him. You're going to be or Zay Jones, or you're going to say, you know what, we need to get Marvin Jones out of here and play Laviska. At some point, something isn't going to line up. Either keeping him will be worth it, and someone else that you've committed to won't be worth it, or keeping him was not worth it, and he didn't get the opportunities because the guys in front of him lived up to the pedestal you put him on or either the contract you signed him up to be. It's a very, very tough situation. It's a good situation to have because you have more people. You have a lot more people that can play. You're talking about your fourth receiver. And then lo and behold, what if what if the rookie from Notre Dame steps up? Or what if Laquan Treadwell plays better and you get to the point where Laviska's not really making a contribution? Now you may have missed your window of opportunity to get a high third day pick for him. And now people will offer you a bag of peanuts. So it's a little bit of a catch-22 situation. I'm going to talk about winning and how it will affect the perception of what has gone on with the wide receiver course, specifically with Laviska Shenault. And I'll do that in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars after I let you guys know about Built Bar. From the people who invented healthy and tasty comes the latest gift to your taste buds. You probably tried the amazing coconut brownie chunk Built Bar, but guess what? Your friends at Built Bar have given coconut brownie chunk the Puffs treatment. That's right. The coconut brownie chunk Built Bar flavor you love is deliciously chewy, marshmallowy, and covered in 100% real chocolate. It's like a fluffy cloud of coconut brownie goodness. That's right. But don't stop drooling and listen. They're good for you. Low calorie, low sugar, high protein, and all delicious. Make sure that you check the macros because you're going to find out they're packed with protein, low sugar, and low calorie, and they're not going to hurt you when you're on your diet. Charles Barkley said this to Zion Williamson: if it tastes good, spit it out. You don't have to do that with Built Bar because I can guarantee you Built Bar tastes good and you don't have to spit it out because it's also good for you. Go to Built.com, use the promo code LOCK15, and you'll get 15% off your order. Now, make sure you check out Mud Pie and my personal favorite, Salted Caramel. If you're trying to figure out, get an assorted box, man. If you're trying to figure out which ones you like, which ones you don't. That's right. So make sure you check out Built Bar at Built.com. Please use the promo code LOCKED15 for your promo code to save 15% off. All right, that NBA mock draft, the first picks of the Ultimate NBA mock draft have been made. Search now for Ultimate NBA mock draft and get over 50 insiders, the Odyssey Sports experts, the draft experts of Locked On NBA Big Board. The 5-episode Ultimate NBA mock draft is underway. Make Ultimate NBA mock draft your second listen today because we are your first listen here on Locked On Jaguars, and we thank you for joining us as usual. So no one will care about stats if these things happen. If everybody's playing well and the guy just gets nicked every now and then, or 2 or 3 guys get nicked and they have to miss some time, Laviska Shenault steps in and catches 3 balls per game, and after 17 games ends up with 51 catches for, let's say 51 catches, a little bit over 12 yards a catch. So he's in the 600 catch range. Let's just say he catches 4 touchdowns, even runs a couple of reverses for first downs. That's not a big enough contribution that's going to take away from other players that may have more stats. But it'll be way more acceptable if this happens, if the team actually wins some games. I'll give you an example. I think last year, Amari Cooper had like 800 yards receiving. And it was his first year that he's been healthy that he did not get 1,000 yards. Dallas traded him for a bag of peanuts. And he looked like he didn't have a whole bunch of interest around the league. Did the $20 million salary have a lot to do with it? Sure. But how come you can trade a guy who has 800 yards and has been a perennial 1,000-yard receiver, and everybody can be okay with it because you think you're getting better by subtraction? Well, it's because you didn't win and he didn't show up when you needed him. On the flip side, I'm sure if you look at the statistics of Van Jefferson in Los Angeles, and you say, okay, well, they got Cooper Kupp, who set all of these records. And then they had Odell. They went and got Odell, but Robert Woods got hurt. They gave him a bunch of money. And then they traded Robert Woods in the offseason, and they got rid of Odell. So you think they'd be happy with Van Jefferson, who follows me, by the way. What's up, Van? And all of a sudden you realize, No, they gave Allen Robinson a boatload of money to come play opposite Cooper Kupp, and you're like, well, does that mean is Van Jefferson not good enough? And they're thinking about bringing back Odell. So in a pass-happy offense where they really throw the ball around a lot, you could get a guy like Van Jefferson, and I'll pull his stats up here for you, and that'll be fine for a team like that. You know why? Because they win, and they're champions, and they're always knocking on the door in their division. And people can get lost in the fact that you only have to make a contribution and make plays every now and then if the team is going to win. No one's even going to care about how much money you make as long as the team wins. And this is a very good example because last year, I just pulled it up, Van Jefferson had 50 catches for 802 yards at 16 yards a catch for 6 touchdowns. That's more than what I just said with Laviska. I said Laviska, 50 catches, 600 yards, and 4 touchdowns, and maybe run a couple of reverses for first downs. You know why that can be acceptable for a team like Los Angeles? And they're very content with making that guy their third or maybe even their fourth receiver. It's because they win. But no one is going to care if you catch 80 balls for 850 yards and 7 touchdowns if you're 4-13. It just won't. And that's what bothers me sometimes about people that just totally pay attention to numbers instead of paying attention to the situation. Less stats on a good team, you're fine. Great stats on a bad team, you're terrible. So my point about Laviska Shenault and the biggest question going into the year is, barring injury, as long as there's no injuries, right? Is he actually going to get the opportunity to live up to the expectations that everyone says that he has the potential to? And will it matter if statistically he does or doesn't? Because if he doesn't and the team wins, nobody will care. And if he does statistically play better and the team loses, guess what? Still won't. The saving grace for Laviska Shenault is Doug Peterson has a habit of just throwing it around a lot, getting everybody involved. It seems like the only person they really probably have to sort of force the ball to make justification for him being there is Christian Kirk. And I don't even think it's a situation of forcing the ball to justify what they paid him. I think it's forcing the ball to him because they believe he's actually that good of a football player. And I believe you guys are a good enough audience and good enough listen that you deserve to hear from me again tomorrow. And that's exactly what you're going to do, because I'll be right here on Locked On Jaguars, bringing you the comprehensive offseason coverage 3 days a week for the rest of the month. We'll get back to it to be a daily podcast as training camp gets ready to get crunked back up. Speaking of Doug Peterson, I'm going to talk about Doug Peterson. Why did they fire him after he won the Super Bowl? Could it be a situation where he was good and the GM was good, but it just didn't fit? Or was he really the guy responsible for them winning? I like him, so you can already tell where I'm going. But we'll talk about Doug Peterson here tomorrow on Locked On Jaguars. Until then, you guys take care of each other like I always say. Have a great day. Tune in next time.